to Gravitas. I'm Aisha Sindhu. On the agenda today, India puts new legislations in place for adoptions. What does this mean for prospective parents? Also, Dhaka's Hole Artisan Bakery, the target of a deadly terror attack last July, is back in business once again. But first, on Gravitas, we count down to the Trump inauguration, which is now just 4 days away. The president-elect is, in his own inimitable style, shaking up the world with his one-liners, even as a section of civil rights activists up the ante against his presidency. Now, while those protests do carry on, the Donald Trump administration is all set to take charge of the US government on the 20th of this month. Meanwhile, as the world counts down to the inauguration, Trump is busy tweeting, talking and commenting on issues that are of huge significance. Even as British Prime Minister Theresa May plans to unveil her plans for withdrawing from the EU on Tuesday, Trump has expressed his belief that Brexit is great. He says the EU is dominated by Germany and that he's willing to sign a trade deal with London at the earliest. Here's more.
Order! Order!
Brexit is great and Britain is smart for opting out of European Union dominated by Germany. That's US President-elect Donald Trump airing his views on Britain's momentous decision last year to leave the European Union.
I thought the UK was so smart in getting out. And you were there and you guys wrote it, put it on the front page.
Yes.
Trump said that Brexit is going to happen.
Yes.
Right? And it happened.
Yes.
And that was what it was going to lose easily. You know, everybody thought I was crazy. Obama said they'll go to the back of the line, meaning if it does happen, and then he had to retract. That was a bad statement.
Trump believes that the British vote in favor of Brexit reflected a desire to retain their national identity. He also promised to relieve any economic pain or isolation for Britain by negotiating a quick trade deal with London.
I predicted the heat I took was unbelievable. And I said, because people don't want to have other people coming in and destroying their country. And you know, in this country, we're going to go very strong borders. From the day I get in, one of the first orders I'm going to sign, day one.
His comments on Sunday also came ahead of British Prime Minister Theresa May unveiling her plan for withdrawal from the EU on Tuesday. With Bureau Inputs, Jessica Taneja for WION.
All right, we're now joined by WION's London Bureau Chief, Mandy Clark. Also in on the conversation from Washington, D.C. is our US Bureau Chief, Giles Gibson. Thanks both of you for joining in on the conversation. Mandy, I'll come to you first. What exactly do you make of Trump's remarks saying that Brexit is great? Clearly fits into his pattern of thinking as we've seen it so far.
Absolutely, and it certainly has been welcomed by the British government. Theresa May could not have asked for better timing. She's been under great pressure to show her hand and see to the British public on what exactly her Brexit strategy will be. So that's what she's planning to announce tomorrow. And there's great speculation that she's going for a hard Brexit, meaning that there'll be red lines, that if Britain cannot get rules on controlling its own borders, that it's willing to step out of the single market, the common market of the European Union, and that could create massive problems for the British economy. Having a massive economy like the United States saying it's a great idea to Brexit and we're going to do one of the first trade deals with you is a huge boost to her. So certainly it's welcome news for the UK.
Right, but alongside that, Mandy, it's also a very public snubbing of the European Union while he is reaching out to England on one side. There's also that sort of dressing down that he's given to the European Union. What is that? What do you make of all of that?
Well, that's an excellent point, and it could make, he certainly has, he's made it very clear that he's issues with Angela Merkel's open door policy. He's said that the EU is dominated by Germany, and there is a feeling that because Donald Trump, particularly this new administration, has backed Britain over Brexit, that it could actually make the trade negotiations going forward for Britain even harder, because what the European Union definitely does not want to do is encourage kind of other big countries like France is considering having their own referendum to step away from the European Union. They don't want that to happen. So they might actually make trade negotiation deals very difficult with Britain to make a point that to stop other countries for trying to leave the Union.
Right, Mandy. In fact, Germany does, of course, figure very significantly in Mr. Trump's comments. Angela Merkel there, of course, as well. I'll come back to you with a question on that in a bit, but I do want to get Giles in on the conversation as well. Giles, it looks like, you know, those protests against the Trump presidency don't seem to be dying down anytime soon, really. And it's just a few days to go for the inauguration now. How widespread are these protests and how legitimate are their aims?
Well, Aisha, it's difficult to tell just being in the capital to see what the sort of feeling across the country is. But as you mentioned, there's a big protest planned for the day after the inauguration on the Saturday this week called the Women's March. Now, the organisers are saying that it's not directly aimed at Trump, but clearly the sort of subtext of this is that possibly hundreds of thousands of women could come into Washington, D.C., march right through the centre of town the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated. And of course, we saw those comments he made in that tape from a few years ago, which surfaced during the campaign. So the day after he becomes US president, there could be hundreds of thousands. That's some of the reports I'm seeing here of women marching through the centre of the Capitol right by Donald Trump on his first day in the new White House.
Right, so clearly he's ruffling feathers even before, you know, he's gotten into that position of power. But the outgoing US ambassador, Giles, to the EU, Anthony Gardner, has warned Trump not to cheer so much for Brexit. He seems to be against any further fragmentation of the EU. Are you picking up anything on that?
Well, the sort of the political analysis certainly on this side of the Atlantic is that Trump clearly sees some similarities between his campaign and the anti-EU, the Brexit campaign. As of course, both campaigns were sort of tough on immigration. They were sort of anti-establishment, insurgent campaigns, sort of going against the traditional political elites. So Donald Trump, my reading of this interview with Michael Gove is that he clearly sees some similarities between his own campaign and the leaders of the Brexit campaign.
All right, Giles, clearly there are parallels that we can draw between what's going on in terms of the way Mr. Trump is projecting himself and what happened with Brexit. But Mandy, again, going back to what he said about the European Union and more specifically about Germany, we've even heard him say that he's going to slap sanctions on one of the biggest automobile manufacturers, BMW, if they decide to go ahead and continue production in Mexico. So at one hand, reaching out to one big power in the European Union, but on the other hand, alienating entirely Germany. Do you think there's more behind all this rhetoric, or is this just him being him?
It's very hard to know what's behind the rhetoric. I think, Donald Trump shoots from the hip. He has said that he wants to do just bilateral trade, so just country to country. He doesn't want to deal with a big bloc. Now, that's going to be difficult because the European Union only speaks with one voice. So he can definitely do a trade deal with Britain, but it's not like he can then do a trade deal with France. France is ultimately a part of the EU. So he's certainly going almost a step further and trying to ideally rip up the EU so he can do bilateral trade. He sees that as the way forward and to get the best deal for America. Now, whether if that's in reality or not is only to be seen, but it's just Donald's personality in full force.
Right, Mandy. And, on the one hand, you have this sort of incoming US president who has, captured really the globe's attention with his comments and all of that. But on the other hand, you also have a number of, murmurs and rumblings going on in Europe itself. Germany specifically is also up for a change in power this year. Do you think also Mr. Trump's comments about the refugee crisis and Angela Merkel opening up Germany's borders for refugees is something that the opposition parties in Germany are also listening to very carefully?
Oh, absolutely. What's happening across Europe, there's three major elections, the Netherlands, France, and Germany, and we're seeing this far-right movement, this anti-immigration, nationalistic patriotism that's really spread across Europe, and there is a very much an anti-immigration feeling in the continent itself. So it will certainly resonate with opponents of Angela Merkel, and that is going to be a major challenge for those elections in October, because every time there is, she faces questions internationally. When there's a terror attack in Germany, she's put under pressure, and it doesn't matter whether these terror attacks have links to immigrants or not. It constantly comes back that there are foreigners in the country, and it's causing problems. So certainly, I think his anti-immigration rhetoric will certainly resonate with those opposition parties, and they will try and make as much political hay with it as possible.
All right, Mandy Clark there in London, Giles Gibson in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, both of you, for weighing in on Donald Trump. I think he's going to give us a lot to talk about even as we go forward, especially with the inauguration coming up. But I'm going to say thanks to you on that note. And staying with America and the man at the center of it all, it seems that the U.S. intelligence agencies have been on Donald Trump's firing line for some time now. Now, allegations that the Russians may have compromising information on him haven't helped further his relationship with them. Here's more on that story.
Trust Donald Trump to say and do the unconventional. More so when it involves his own intelligence agencies. Here's his take on CIA reports that the Russians had compromising information on him.
I think it was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do.
And then there was that famous tweet. Quote, intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in the Nazi Germany?
But what I do find outrageous is equating an intelligence community with Nazi Germany. I do take great umbrage at that, and there is no basis for Mr. Trump to point fingers at the intelligence community for leaking information that was already available publicly.
That upset the CIA director, John Brennan. Trump was unfazed. There followed another tweet. Russia just said the unverified report paid for by political opponents is a complete and total fabrication, utter nonsense, very unfair, unquote. With Bureau Inputs, Jessica Taneja for WION.
To talk more about Trump, Russia and the CIA troika, we have writer and former intelligence officer Glenn Carl joining us from the US right now. Glenn, thanks so much for being with us here on WION. So it becomes very apparent that Trump doesn't seem to hold the CIA in very high esteem, but he will have to deal with them very soon. Now, how exactly do you see that relationship panning out?
Well, he doesn't hold the CIA or the intelligence community in high esteem, but it's not anything unusual for Trump. Any person or organization that does anything that Trump believes diminishes from his sense of greatness or being the center of all things, he will then viciously attack. So in a sense, we're dealing with 4 or 5-year-old psychological mentality. That said, I mean, that's the fact that we truly have a psychological child as the president-elect. And the intelligence community exists to serve the executive, directly the executive of the United States, not simply the entire U.S. government, but the executive in a direct line. So this creates, I think, an existential crisis for the institution, the CIA, as well as for the United States. This is a grave institutional crisis. It's very hard to serve someone who dismisses anything except for praise and then reflexively responds with an emotional and uninformed opinion. So it's a grave crisis.
So you're drawing some interesting comparisons there. But even if we are to look beyond Mr. Trump's sort of psychological, misgivings in this case, but dislike or distrust of the intelligence community here seems almost pathological on one end. Why do you feel that is? Is it only on account of how they've come out against him, or is there more to this dislike between Mr. Trump and the CIA?
I think it's the former. Anything that criticizes him draws his anger. Prior to having to think about the CIA to some extent while running for office and now as the president-elect, I don't think the intelligence community or foreign affairs entered very much into his thoughts except in a reflexive, populist and isolationist way. He has a series of attitudes, but no particular knowledge. However, this does pose a tremendous problem. What is the CIA? What are the United States government officials to do? And I think that all one can do is there are other elements of the government. There's the military, there are civilian leaders, there's the State Department, and the intelligence community will present the assessments and information that we collect and reach to those organs of government in the hope that they will continue to act responsibly. And of course, they continue to provide them to the president. But it's a reflexive thing with President-elect Trump. As I say, anything that he thinks diminishes him, he will then viciously attack. So it's not a personal issue, actually. He has no special animus against the agency.
So anyone who really catches his eye or gets it right back. Okay, stay with us, Glenn. I've also got Dmitry Babich, the head of the Russian international news agency Sputnik, joining us right now on the program. Dmitry, thanks for speaking with us here on WION. With Mr. Trump coming down so heavily on his own intelligence agencies, does that sort of assuage Russia or work as some sort of balm over there? How do you perceive his attitude towards the agencies going forward?
Well, I think that in any country, when the president sees the security agencies getting directly involved in internal politics, and unfortunately that's what we're seeing now, it's the responsibility of the president to cut these agencies to size. I'm surprised to hear that you are talking about Mr. Trump being criticized. The sleazy stories about Mr. Trump, you know, the personal attacks against him, this is not criticism. This is an open witch hunt. And unfortunately, the American security agencies joined in that witch hunt, which is very unfortunate. In Russia, this is all perceived as a great disappointment. You know, we believed, at least a lot of us believed in the American democracy. We believed in the American institutions such as the unbiased press, security agencies which do not get involved in internal politics. And we see all of this crumbling in the last year of Obama's presidency. In order to be persuasive, I can just quote you what I read in the Washington Post the day before yesterday about Trump. That's on the editorial page. Donald Trump is a one-man basket of deplorables. He is a braggart and a liar. He is an ignoramus and a deadbeat. And his love for himself is matched only by our loathing for him. End of quote. So this is the kind, if this is criticism, then I don't know what is an insult. Basically in Russia, we see all of this situation with profound sadness, not so much for ourselves as for America, which used to be the beacon of democracy for mankind, and which is no longer that beacon.
Okay, Dmitry, I'm going to ask, I have a few more questions for you, but I'd like to ask Glenn if he'd like to react to what Dmitry just had to say.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, I think the merit of what Dmitry just said is that it conveys what the Russian intelligence service and the Russian government are spreading as their official and unofficial and propaganda line. Beyond that, it has nothing to do with reality whatsoever. We know for facts that the German intelligence service, the French intelligence service, the British intelligence service, and the American intelligence services all independently have found information, indications of a Russian campaign to support Donald Trump and to diminish Hillary Clinton in the campaign, to interfere with the American electoral process. We know that Donald Trump has sided invariably with Vladimir Putin and the Russians, and a press statement from the Russian president's office, rather than the formal assessments of all 17 agencies of the American government. So to characterize that, as Dmitry did, as some sort of a campaign, then to blame it on Obama, is just sort of either bad faith or ignorance. I'm sorry, that's simply not the fact. And the Washington Post statement simply observes in a couple of hundred words what has happened for the last 18 months with these statements of Donald Trump, which are insulting and divorced from facts as we know them. That's the truth.
Right, Dimitri, in fact, let's go back to that, the quote that you came with. That was an editorial in the Washington Post. And I'm not taking sides here, but John Brennan did also say that it was the duty of intelligence agencies in the United States to bring that information forward to President Obama and the president-elect. And this was information that was already out in the public sphere. So it wasn't necessarily a leak from intelligence agencies in that country. What do you make of that? Is that defensive rhetoric, or is that a legitimate answer to what you're accusing the agencies of?
Well, it's interesting that my opponent, Glenn, is immediately trying to liaise me to the Russian government or the intelligence services. I would rather speak about the facts about the Washington Post. I just quoted for you the Washington Post. No one forced them to publish it. It was not forced on them by the Russian government or by anyone in the United States. Maybe their owners forced them to publish these insulting words. Whatever Trump said, he didn't call his opponent in the race a braggart, a liar, a basket of deplorables. These are all words from Hillary Clinton and from the press, 90% of the American mainstream press that supported Hillary Clinton. And I think this is the main problem. I think a lot of people voted for Trump not because they were impressed by the information about Hillary Clinton, even though there was a lot of very unflattering information about her even years before the race started. I think people were dismayed by the fact that the President of the United States, Barack Obama, for the first time in history, he did not just endorse the candidate of his party, but during the whole campaign, he attacked, he blasted, the candidate of the other party. That is not the American way. The American presidents never attacked the candidates from other parties, because that is a founding stone of any democracy, that the state and its officials should be neutral during the electoral campaign. Talking about the information about Donald Trump, that sleaze about him having an affair with prostitutes in a Russian hotel, something that was never backed up by facts. Well, we know now from the American press that this information came from a British intelligence official who also used to publish compromising information about the FIFA heads, about Michel Platini, the legend of who had to go through a character assassination by the American and the British press. Now we know what kind of people, the people like this deplorable agent Christopher Steele, they are the sources of sleazy information about Michel Platini, now about Donald Trump, maybe also about a number of other people in the past.
Right.
I'm going to defend Donald Trump here. I may not like him as a person, I may not like him as a politician. We're talking about institutions here and not about persons.
Right, but Dimitri, allow me to come in. In the same breath, I mean, Trump also seems to be relying more on Russia's denial of the report than his own agencies confirming the report, isn't he? Isn't that in itself also indicative of, deep fissures within the U.S. democracy when the president doesn't seem to be believing in what his own agencies are bringing back to him? Isn't that a bigger worry for you?
I absolutely agree with you that it's very dangerous for any democracy. If it's a democracy first, it's a travesty when a democracy has 17 security agencies. You don't need 17 security agencies if you are a democracy. Second, it's very deplorable when all of these 17 security agencies get involved in internal politics, basically disputing the victory of a candidate in a presidential race. As for the president not having faith in his own security system and relying sometimes even on foreign information, we had it in the end of the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev, when there was a coup against him, He had a conflict with the KGB, so he relied on the information from the BBC, from the Radio Free Europe. Unfortunately, right now, RT, Sputnik, and other Russian media sometimes have to play the same role with the United States because the American press has got so biased and so discredited. A lot of people simply don't believe it.
Okay, I'm going to ask Glenn to come in on that. Glenn, I can see you reacting to everything Dmitry is saying. Why don't you take us through what you feel in terms of what Dmitry just had to say?
Gosh, it's hard to know where to start. It's almost like talking to Donald Trump, where there's the reality in the earth where our feet touch the soil, and then there's the world of imagination and distorted facts that we just were listening to. 25 years ago, I worked closely with my, first they were Soviet and then Russian counterparts. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, I was hopeful, and we were all hopeful with Mikhail Gorbachev's perestroika and change of the system, that there would be a more fact-based and collaborative relationship between the two. I was naive, and I found that the power of entrenched interests in the institutions largely was unchanged, and that remains to be the case as we're listening to today. There really is not too much change from simply propaganda mouthpieces that we are listening to. To say, I'll just take one point, which to show how virtually everything we just heard was twisted in a nefarious way, unrelated to the facts. The gentleman did say that Christopher Steele had worked on the FIFA case, the International Soccer Organization, and he characterized this, as Dmitry did, as in some way a disparaging indication of how the man was not to be trusted. In that one instance, actually, we all know that the facts are that the individuals, the officers in FIFA, were all crooks. And they have been found out to be so, just as Christopher Steele's investigation found.
Right.
I'll just repeat that the French intelligence organization, the British intelligence organization, the German intelligence organization, and the American all independently have reached the same conclusions. Now, to report what is being said, what is circulating about a presidential candidate to the candidate and to the American government is the responsibility of the government. They do not pass judgment on that. And to characterize that as an attack is simply a cheap shot or ignorant.
Okay, so character assassination may take place, but when there is a report worthy of investigating, it has to go through. I am going to ask both of you to hold on with us. We're going to have to go forward on the program a little bit. We've already begun our conversation about the US and Russia, but we've got a report up for you in a bit, because there's one thing about Trump's impending presidency that has surprised everyone. It has been his much talked about closeness to Russia. Take a look at this story. We'll be back with Dmitry and Glenn to break it down.
His views on Russia have gone against the grain of decades of US policy. In recent days, Donald Trump has even called for the US and Russia to jointly cut their nuclear arsenals. He said, "They have sanctions on Russia. Let's see if we can make some good deals with Russia. For one thing, I think nuclear weapons should be way down and reduced very substantially. That's part of it." But his nominee for defense, General James Mattis, has reflected a more establishment view.
Consider the principal threats to start with Russia, and it would certainly include any nations that are looking to intimidate nations around their periphery, regional nations nearby them, whether it be with weapons of mass destruction or I would call it unusual, unorthodox means of intimidating them, that sort of thing. And at the same time, as the chairman's pointed out, we face now an era where we're going to be fighting the terrorist threat. I mean, that's simply a reality. We're going to have to address that one.
Trump has not explained that contradiction, but he has been quick to counter reports or allegations about his business interests in Russia.
I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away. And I have no loans with Russia. As a real estate developer, I have very, very little debt. I have assets that are, and now people have found out how big the company is. I have very little debt. I have very low debt. But I have no loans with Russia at all. And I thought that was important to put out. I certify that. So I have no deals. I have no loans. And I have no dealings. We could make deals in Russia very easily if we wanted to. I just don't want to because I think that would be a conflict. So I have no loans, no dealings, and no current pending deals.
For more on how the Washington-Moscow connection could evolve, wait for January 20th, when President-elect Trump emerges as President Donald Trump. In New Delhi, with Bureau Inputs, this is Manoj Kevalramani, WION.
Dimitri Babich and Glenn Carl are with us to talk more about that story. Before I take any questions to both of you, gentlemen, I'll request you to keep them short because we want to pack in as much as possible into the conversation. Glenn, first up to you, quick question. Is Donald Trump too Russia-friendly?
Oh, it's very disturbing. Absolutely, it's disturbing. Sure. I mean, improving relations with Russia would be a fine thing. This is an objective that any leader should have, and Russians should have with respect to whatever countries they deal with. That's a generic, almost meaningless statement. It's like saying motherhood is good. You hope for that, yes. But you always, it was Mikhail Gorbachev who had the expression in Russian, which I can't speak, unfortunately, which was you trust, but you verify first in any deal. So simply reflexively to side with Russia as opposed to the positions that have been worked out over decades by Republicans and Democrats over since 1945 is probably an unwise starting point. You always wish to explore better relations, but you don't reflexively side with the other side to begin.
Okay, Dimitri, do you see in the remarks that we've seen coming out of the Trump camp about Russia pointing to a new beginning between the two countries? And if so, what is that going to mean for the larger global order?
Well, I think first I would like to correct Glenn a little bit. The expression "доверяй, но проверяй," trust but check, belongs to Reagan, not to Gorbachev. The problem with Gorbachev was that he blindly trusted the American politicians, and we are paying a price for that, unfortunately. I think it's just terrible. I can't believe my ears when I hear the American politicians, the American press, whom I respected during almost all of my life, when they make business deals with a foreign country a pretext for some kind of concern or suspicion. That sounds like the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin to me, when if you had any a connection with a British journalist, let alone a business connection with Britain or with the United States, you were immediately in big trouble. That's not what America used to be. And the question is that no one is even saying that Trump was doing something illegal in Russia, something non-transparent. They just say that if he had any business deals, that's bad. Well, that is terrible. That is xenophobia. Talking about the previous theme that we just discussed, you know, Christopher Steele was lying about Donald Trump. That was acknowledged by CNN, by everyone. So my question is, if that was the same person who investigated FIFA, can we trust these kind of persons? Can we trust these kind of reports about FIFA? If you lied once, that means you probably have been lying very often during all of your life.
But then can the American public, you know, trust somebody who's not even willing to come out with his, you know, tax details? I'm going to ask you to both stay to the point. Glenn, should the CIA chief resign? If you were there in that position and you heard remarks comparing the agency you work with Nazi Germany, would that be horrifying enough for you to decide to put in your papers?
It may well. I've written that there is an existential crisis for the American government, not just the CIA, and for the American society. This is the gravest crisis, the election of President-elect Donald Trump, to the American system of government since 1861, when the country split in half and we had a civil war. So CIA officers have a choice. They can serve the president, which makes them a toady, a subservient person trying to serve someone who only is interested in self-aggrandizement. Or they can resign, in which case they will be replaced by someone who then will serve them, or they can try to act honorably and serve the institutions, as I said before, by working with other officials. I would argue for that for the time being, but to serve someone who so visibly and demonstrably acts in ways that are harmful to the American government is a real challenge.
Okay, Dimitri, very quickly, the last question I have time for on the program. Do you expect that there is going to be a sort of conflict between Trump and John Mattis when it comes to the attitude of America toward Russia?
I think there will be a conflict not just between Trump and John Mattis, but Donald Trump is facing not just one or two enemies. He will have to sustain the blows from ultra-liberal ideology, an unholy alliance of liberal interventionists and neocons who are now dominating, unfortunately, the American politics. If he tries to cut a deal with them, that will be useless. He will be destroyed in the same way the Ukrainian President Yanukovych was destroyed, because these people don't respect elections, they don't respect the opinion of voters. Anyone who stands on their way, they will try to remove him. So I would advise Mr. Trump to expect impeachment attempts just about every week, probably in the next few months, maybe a few years. And he will have to define his enemy, which is not a person but an ideology, and he will have to fight. If he fights, he will survive. If he tries to cut a deal with them, they will deceive him and destroy him.
Okay, Dmitry Babich there in Russia and Glenn Carl in the United States. Thanks, gentlemen. You brought some very different viewpoints and perspectives to the conversation here on Gravitas. We always appreciate the time you give us here on the program. But January 20th, that will be the date that the world will be looking forward to. And there are sure to be quite a few Russians in it. On that note, we are going to take a quick break for now. But when we do come back, it is the big news from India. The process of adoption has got a lot more simpler. Or has it? More on that when we come back. Stay with us on Gravitas.